Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second virtual discussion of Chronicle Days 21. I'm Minidu Amarasekara and I'll be your host for today. The discussion today will be on how history can be made accessible through social media and YouTube. To discuss more on this, join us today is a very interesting personality, and she'll be sharing her side of the story and her views on the topic. Now, most of us know her as the mastermind behind the trending YouTube channel Patta History, but that's not all. She is also a Master's Holder in Arts from the University of Edinburgh and the Chief Growth Officer of Hemas Holdings plc. She is also a board member of HealthNet Private Limited and has served as a board member of Digital Healthcare Solutions Private Limited, as well as Colombo Academy of Hospitality Management in the past. She's none other than Mrs. Ruwani Hettiarachchi. Hello and welcome, madam.
Thank you very much, Minidu, for that kind introduction. It's good to be here.
We are so honored to have you here with us, and we look forward to having an interesting discussion with you today. So, madam, starting off, for most of us, history has not been the favorite during school days, but your channel has revolutionized the way most people look at history and also made it very interesting for us to learn. Can you tell us more about Patta history and what drove you to start something like that?
Yes, certainly. First of all, thank you very much to the Royal College History Club for inviting Patta History to your virtual sessions. Certainly. So, Minidu, it started because I lived overseas for some time. I lived overseas for quite some time in my youth and my young adulthood. And I had an interrupted connection to Sri Lanka. So I didn't follow the full school syllabus here, and I wasn't able to follow, history as a curriculum, Sri Lankan history. So when I returned to Sri Lanka, I realized that I was missing some context, some important context, even though obviously my parents and relatives were immersed in, the culture of Sri Lanka and the day-to-day life of Sri Lanka. I had a lot of questions about why things were happening. Particularly as an economist, I was very interested in understanding the economic and political systems that had brought us to where we are today. So that was sort of the origin, it was just genuine curiosity, to learn more about my country, my people, why we are the way we are. So that was sort of part of the reason. And then the second part of the reason was really the fact that we have not really reconciled with our history, in that we have a painful history, we have an interesting history, we have a long history, but we haven't really examined it and really reconciled with it, who we are today. We're a collection of identities that haven't really been explored well enough. So that also really drove me to peel behind why people are saying certain things, why people are representing themselves in certain ways, to really learn a little bit more. So there's almost this, curiosity to understand who we are today. And then I suppose the final thing was really history sort of it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. That's something that I've learned, right? So you're not continuously repeating the same things, but there is a pattern to what we do. So, for example, when we were doing the story on independence, the 1915 riots were repeated almost exactly, action for action, sequence for sequence, 100 years later in 2014. And why is that, right? It was almost the same set of events. It was a Sinhala Muslim riot. It was almost the reasons and the causes were almost exactly and identically the same. So I was wondering, why are we sort of doomed to repeat these cycles? If we really learned a little bit more about who we are and where we come from, that was sort of, what drove me. So then obviously when COVID happened, I had always been a fan of, watching history on YouTube and, watching history videos, watching documentaries on history, reading and learning about history. And I found the medium of YouTube to be extremely effective in telling a story, and particularly animated stories, because what animated stories do is they remove the seriousness and the difficulty of interpreting something like watching people on film, and instead they make you empathize with the characters as well. So I don't know if you've heard about Extra History, which is a very famous international YouTube channel. So we really modeled Patta history on that particular channel. When we were stuck indoors in during COVID in April and 2020 last year, my husband and I were left with wondering, what can we do with some of our spare time? What are some of the things that we can do to really give back and make an impact on the broader community around us? So we really thought this is something that we have to do. So we thought we'd definitely start with Patta history. And there was a wave of sentiment at that time as well, particularly sort of ignited by the death of George Floyd in the US. And there was a wave of anti-colonialism that was starting to really spread, or a rise of real reconciliation with our colonial past. So it was sort of a confluence of events that drove us to start it.
Yes, that was really nice, ma'am. Me personally watched some of your videos and it was quite interesting for sure. There were some parts in history even I didn't know, but I got to know about it after I watched it, and thank you very much for that. And but ma'am, I have a question. Is history a subject which you can, like, if you teach it correctly, it goes into the mind of the subjects? I mean like spectators. If you like teach it correctly, it's sometimes some people think it's like a boring subject, or it's not that creative or something like that. But do you think if you taught it in an interesting way, it will go into the mind of the students? So do you think it's some kind of a subject like that? So is the teaching wrong or something?
So I think, I completely agree that the way we teach and learn history today is limiting. It limits individual curiosity. But when you read the newspaper today, Minidu, as you and your colleagues might be reading newspapers today, and you all are looking at current events, as we do, I also look at current events. And what I suppose, for me, the teaching of history does is it places in a context and understanding of what I'm reading today and how I interpret current events today. So I think history as a subject, particularly ancient history, which might have a little less relevance, is probably not done service in its current format, particularly in its current teaching format. So I absolutely think that there is an opportunity to revolutionize and alter the way we stimulate the curiosity of people today. And I think the best way to do that is by linking today's events with what has happened in the past, because that is a revelation. Because when you reveal today, okay, so for example, if I'm reading today that there is a trade union action. So for example, there's going to be a trade union action in the next few days, as there has been in the last few days in the healthcare sector. When I read that, I should place in context, what was the cause of this? Well, how did this union start? What are these people asking for? What were the institutions and influences that developed this particular sector, these particular actions? What are the historical rights and wrongs that may have happened? So I think it's just a genuine curiosity. I think if we can do a better job of stimulating people's genuine curiosity about what's happening today, and also really encouraging people to ask why things are happening, and not really accept them at face value. So when you ask the why question, that's when history becomes very interesting.
I totally agree with you on that as well, because country's history is more important to us, and it shows the prestigious history of our countries, and it's like the identity of a country. And that's a very nice comment. Okay. So ma'am, moving on to our next question. There are many sources that have recorded the prestigious history of this country. But to verify the historical facts, how do you find out, or how do you identify the valid ones out of all of them?
So that's a very good question. History, I think, all over the world is written by various people. And there's a saying that says that history is written by the victor. So the people who won a war or won a side get to write the telling of that story. But then you and I both know that there are three sides to a story. That's your side, there's my side, and that's what actually happened. So what we are trying to really reveal with Patta history is what actually happened. And to do that, it's about not just verifying facts and details, but staying unbiased. So I'll tell you a little bit about our process of doing both of those things, remaining and staying unbiased and telling the story as it happened as much as we can, and also verifying the actual historical detail. So it starts with what kind of stories we're telling. So when I say stories, I don't mean that we're making anything up. Where obviously what we're picking is, with Patta history, we want to identify stories or topics that people will find interesting, first of all. So we always pick either a person, a historical character, or an episode in our history that's short and digestible. So that's the first thing. So it has to be a sort of a digestible telling of the story, because what we do is a deep dive. We like to go very deep into the subject and do a lot of research. The second criteria for picking these stories is that there has to be what you call a did you know factor. So you mentioned right at the start that there were certain things that even you didn't know about our history. And that's the same for us. When we learn and when we are doing our research, there are certain things that we learn for the first time. So when we understand, okay, there is a extraordinary fact or set of events that people don't know about, that if told in the right way will make people sit up, get more curious, want to learn more, that's a good story as well. So we have, 2 or 3 criteria. The third criteria is obviously the best possible stories are the ones that are rhyming with current events. Right, so rhyming with current events, whether it's a conflict or whether it's a point of our economy, whether it's a sort of a political struggle, whether it's a racial struggle. We'd like to pick stories that will say, like, look, this also happened 200 years ago, it happened 500 years ago, it happened 50 years ago. So there are 3 criteria that we pick. Then we have a fairly rigorous process. So it all starts with the picking of the story, and then we go into the research. We work with a couple of historians full-time. The historian who we work with very, very closely is a 3rd-generation historian. So his name is Ruwani Hettiarachchi, and he has an enormous library of Sri Lankan history, because both his father and his grandfather were historians and historical researchers who have a treasure trove of data at their fingertips. So we start with the research, and then between the historian and myself, we're always questioning sources. So when we pick a source up and we look at the sources, what we prefer to do is always rely on academic sources. We try not to rely too much on non-academic sources, because they may be biased. But there is a trick. You can use biased information as long as you understand it's biased. And when I say use, you mean you incorporate the point of view of that biased person, but you also elaborate that this point of view may be biased. So it's about understanding and knowing when a source might be biased, when it's trying to further a certain agenda, whether it's coming from a predetermined point of view, whether they have a particularly strongly held political belief. That's when you have to recognize that the source may be biased. So Uvindu and myself are always having debates back and forth about the quality of the research that we are reading. So that's that's debates that we're always having. Is this a good source? Did this actually happen? What was this? Was this the way that this particular thing was recorded? It is the actual fact. So when you rely on a good academic peer-reviewed research, you're also relying on those qualified academics to also do primary research on your behalf. So they are the ones who have actually gone to the original sources, the texts, the police records, the archaeological findings, the museums, and they've done they've done that work. So we are not going to go and do primary research, but we will rely on good secondary researchers and biographers who we think are unbiased. So that's one thing. So when we write the script, so I convert this into the script, and together with Uvindu, and then we move into the production part of the process. So in the production part of the process, obviously we're storyboarding the script. Even at that point, we have our historian embedded in every part of the process, because when we are bringing the script into visual references, things like, for example, logos, the uniforms that people wore, the clothes that people wore, the accessories, the crowns that people wore, it's obviously very important that these are rendered in absolute historical with absolute historical accuracy. So a historian is also deeply embedded into the process. And then, of course, we do a final check, which is, a sensibility check to see if we are telling this story sensibly, and if we are also going to insult the sensibilities of anyone by being on the wrong side. So, for example, we even ask questions about, whether Queen Anula had dark skin or light skin, whether, Parakrama Bapu had light skin or dark skin. So we try and answer those questions and try not to be too predetermined. So if we're depicting a Tamil person or a Muslim person or an Indian person, we try and understand, okay, what could their skin color have been? What could they have been wearing? And embed ourselves into the research to try and tell that with as much accuracy as possible. So at every part of the process, we're doing that. Even in the narration, sometimes, we have to rely quite heavily on how, for example, when we're telling ancient history stories, we don't really know how certain words were pronounced in either Pali or Sanskrit, because these are languages that are not spoken today. So we have to again go back to, historians, our connections, and, people, perhaps teachers, like some of your teachers who would have, understood how certain words are pronounced, to go and get references from them. So at every single part of the process, we're trying to have what we call guardrails to make sure we're telling an unbiased as well as an accurate story. And then, of course, once we put the story out, sometimes our fans and our audience will come back and say, this particular detail is wrong, or that particular detail is wrong. Here is my source. So we will ask our audience to also feed back to us, because this is not a one-way thing. We also want our audience and people who are particularly interested in history, even maybe some of your club members, to write to us and tell us this particular fact or visual is wrong. We would like you to correct it, and here is my source. So at every part of the process, it's a live thing, it's an ongoing thing. History is not, not just a one-way telling of the story. It's not a word on a page. It's something that's live and it's living and it's breathing. So we're constantly trying to evolve and get better on that particular front.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for that. So, ma'am, my next question is, your channel has got a lot of attention from the younger generation these days because of the social media. How do you think we can spread popular interest in history through social media going forward?
Okay, so social media can be both a blessing and a curse when it comes to the dissemination of messages and facts. So now we are living in a world where, because people's our attention is grabbed by lovely shiny objects on social media. If somebody, for example, starts circulating a meme, regardless of how accurate that meme is, it'll have a certain viral quality. It'll get shared, it'll get spread. So what I would do is I think we need to take advantage of the fact that there's a certain viral quality that we can use and harness to increase the curiosity that people have today about what happened and why, and challenge the notions that we have established. So I think one of the, for example, when I think really about our viewers and our audience, I'm in my late 30s now, you guys are in school. I really think that it's your generation that's really going to change our world. So when I think about the people who will come into this world and help us reveal and reconcile ourselves and our notions of identity, I really think it's your generation that will do it. So I'm really hoping that social media will be a tool that your generation will use for better and for eliciting curiosity about today's events. So, it's simple. It starts with simple things, right? It starts by asking why. So it starts by, looking at the newspaper today and someone, looking at, say, for example, what is happening in the cabinet today, what's happening with our economic situation today, what's happening with our Ministry of Finance today, and asking why are certain things the way they are. Watching the news and seeing interviews and asking why. So if we can translate some of that curiosity and harness social media so that, the messages that we're sharing also start stimulating our curiosity and our intellect, and I think that's when we'll start getting interested about what happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago to shape our identity and position things the way they are today.
Ma'am, I got another question for you. Ma'am, in order to not just history, but should we start revolutionizing other subjects as well? Because it's not just history, but other subjects as well. Because in order to create curiosity among people, Do you think history should be revolutionized from now on?
So I think, I was recently speaking with, I was recently at a forum where there's a fantastic Sri Lankan business leader, someone who's really done a lot in terms of developing new businesses, venturing into new areas. Almost was saying that education in its traditional sense is going to be completely revolutionized, because there is nothing that you cannot access today, that's confined to a textbook. You can access any kind of information today online. You can access any kind of information. If you want to get a master's level education, you can certainly get it by studying a subject. I don't know, I'm not an expert on education, but what I would suggest is we need to harness more of storytelling in order, particularly when it comes to teaching things like history, politics, the social sciences. We need to harness storytelling. I think learning facts and learning a sequence of events in a textbook is probably going to limit students' curiosity forever on the subject. Whereas if I learn the story of SWRD the way that, for example, Patta history tells it in 4 episodes, dramatic episodes, I would have hoped that our audiences, were deeply curious about the Bandaranayakas, where they came from, their historical legacy, why they are the way today, the kind of influences that he battled, and the kind of legacy that he left behind. The fact that we harnessed storytelling to tell that story, I find it really would play well, when we translate certain subjects. So I don't know if you can you can learn things like mathematics and perhaps even physics through storytelling, but certainly the social sciences are probably better suited to storytelling style. So there are certainly subjects that can be modernized and renovated if we can apply a little imagination to the way that people want to learn today. I'm not a grade student, but I love it when I can watch something, when something is depicted visually to me, when someone puts in effort into telling a well-crafted story. For me, I have a great and deep appreciation for that, and a deep appreciation for the subject. So that I hope that that's probably one change that we can start working on.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, going to our last question for the session. Ma'am, do you think history is still relevant? Why is it so important for us to be familiar with it?
So I suppose that goes back to some of my earlier remarks, which is everything that's happening today has a historical context. Everything that's happening today happened because there was a certain sequence of events that was set in motion either 20 years ago or even 2,000 years ago. And it would be silly of us to think that what's happening today doesn't have any bearing on what happened 100 years ago or 50 years ago. In fact, some of both the wonders of Sri Lanka today, as well as the perils and perhaps even to a certain extent the tragedy of Sri Lanka today, is that we haven't fully reconciled with our history. We haven't fully said, we have put in motion a series of events that we think are irreversible. Whereas if we go back and say, all right, there was a certain policy decision made, or there was a decision made in haste, 50 years ago, and we, as in our generation, are facing the consequence of that, perhaps a good place to start would be examining the events and the context and understanding, look, do we have the systems in place today that are serving the needs of our country today? So I think history is absolutely relevant. Understanding why is absolutely relevant. I don't think you can escape it. So yes, I should hope that Patta history is relevant and that history is still relevant today.
Yes, ma'am. Patta history is actually very interesting. Me personally, like I said before, it was very interesting for me. And I think when I looked at the comment section, and I think people are really happy about the videos, and it was like the Parakram Bahu. I think he was a great king, and you explained it really well in those videos. So thank you very much, madam, for that. So madam, since we have reached the end of the discussion, I would like to hand over space to the project secretary, Akindu Samaravira. Akindu, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Minidu.
Okay, thank you, Minidu. Firstly, I would like to take time to extend my heartiest thanks to today's guest speaker, Mrs. Ruwani Hettiarachchi, without whom today's session would not have been a success. Your insight and knowledge about history, which you were kind enough to share with us. Next, I would like to thank the Senior Master of Clubs and Societies, Mr. Amatunga Sir, and the teacher in charge of our club, Mr. Palita Abeyawardena. For being our guiding light through these trying times. And also, I would like to thank to our prefects to motivating and leading us to do like this success project. And the project committee did such a venture to make this event success. Finally, I would like to thank our members and attendees who attend today. And our next session will be giving out soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.